"It hurts so much I can't bear it," the Apache girl said. The lone rancher, the sun hung low over the vast Arizona plains, painting the dry grass in shades of gold and red. The wind whispered softly through the sparse trees and sagebrush. Samuel, a solitary rancher, walked slowly along the fence line that marked the edge of his land. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust with every step, and his weathered hat shaded eyes that had seen many lonely years. Life on the plains was quiet, often too quiet, and Samuel had grown accustomed to it. He was used to the hum of crickets at night, the distant howls of coyotes, and the endless stretch of sky above him. The solitude had once been comforting, but sometimes on evenings like this, it felt heavy, pressing down on him like the sun itself. He had been tending his ranch for more than 20 years, ever since he had moved west after losing his family to sickness back east. The loss had left him cautious, wary of others, and determined to live a life of independence. His days were filled with the rhythm of work, feeding the cattle, mending fences, checking the water troughs, and riding out to ensure that no predators had strayed too close to his herd. Yet, despite the routine, there was a constant undercurrent of loneliness, an emptiness he could never quite fill. As he moved along the edge of his property, Samuel noticed something unusual. A small figure appeared in the distance, half hidden by the tall, dry grass. At first he thought it might be one of the local children, though it was far too far from any settlement for that to make sense. As he drew closer, he saw that it was not a child from a nearby town. It was a young girl, with long, dark hair and eyes that reflected both fear and exhaustion. She was sitting on the ground, her small frame trembling as she leaned against a rock. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He had seen many travelers pass by over the years, but never someone in such obvious distress. The girl looked as if she had walked for miles. Her clothes were torn and dusty, and her bare feet were red and scraped from the rough terrain. There was a deep cut on her leg, and she clutched it with both hands, wincing with every movement. Her lips were dry, and her eyes, wide with pain, darted nervously around as if she expected danger at any moment. He dismounted his horse and approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he called softly, keeping his voice gentle. "You're hurt. Can I help you?" The girl flinched at his voice, pulling her legs closer to her chest. She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes, but she didn't speak. Samuel realized that she might not understand English, or perhaps she was too frightened to respond. He stayed at a safe distance, letting her see he meant no harm. Slowly he lowered himself to the ground, sitting a few feet away from her. "I won't hurt you," he said again, his tone calm and steady. "My name is Samuel. I can help you." For a long moment the girl said nothing. She only looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, pain, and a silent plea for help. Finally she whispered in a trembling voice, "It hurts so much I can't bear it." Her words were broken, but the meaning was clear. Samuel felt a pang of sorrow. He had seen pain before, but there was something different about this girl's suffering. It was not just the physical injury. It was the weight of loneliness, fear, and loss that she carried. He slowly reached into his satchel and pulled out a small canteen of water. "Here," he said, holding it out. "Drink this. It will help a little." The girl hesitated, but the heat and exhaustion were too much to resist. She took the canteen with shaky hands and drank carefully, her eyes never leaving his face. Samuel noticed how fragile she seemed, like a bird with a broken wing, and he felt a deep responsibility to protect her. He glanced around, thinking about what to do next. The nearest town was miles away, and with her injury, she could not walk that distance. His cabin, small but sturdy, was closer, and it offered shelter and safety. He stood slowly and offered his hand. "I can take you to my home," he said gently. "You'll be safe there, and I can take care of your leg." The girl looked at his hand, then back at the open plains behind her, as if weighing the danger of trusting a stranger. After a long pause, she slowly took his hand, and he helped her to her feet. She winced as she put weight on her injured leg, and Samuel supported her carefully, guiding her toward his horse. The ride back to his ranch was quiet, the only sounds the soft clip-clop of hooves and the wind rushing past. Samuel kept glancing at the girl, whose head rested against his shoulder, her eyes closed in pain. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He knew that whatever had brought her here, she had endured something terrible, and for now, all that mattered was her safety. When they reached the cabin, Samuel helped her inside and settled her onto a bed he had prepared. He cleaned his hands and examined the cut on her leg. It was deep, but with some care, it could heal. He mixed some water with clean cloths to wash the wound, speaking to her in soft tones. She flinched at first, but he was patient, waiting until she relaxed enough to allow him to help. As he worked, he noticed her shivering, not from cold, but from exhaustion and fear. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and placed a small bowl of water nearby. "Rest now," he said gently. "You're safe here. No one can hurt you." The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and lingering fear. She whispered again, "Thank you." Her voice was small, almost lost, but it carried a weight that touched Samuel deeply. That night, Samuel stayed by her side, keeping the cabin quiet and warm. He thought about the journey that must have brought her here, about the family she had lost or been separated from, and about the courage it must have taken to survive alone in the desert. He realized that life sometimes brings strangers together in unexpected ways, and that even the loneliest hearts can find connection in moments of shared vulnerability. By morning, the girl had slept more soundly, though the pain had not disappeared. She stirred, looking at Samuel with eyes that were less fearful now, more trusting. Samuel prepared a small breakfast, simple but nourishing, and watched as she ate carefully. They still did not speak the same language fluently, but they had found a way to communicate through gestures, expressions, and a growing understanding that went beyond words. Samuel knew that this was only the beginning of their story. The girl had come into his life unexpectedly, bringing with her sorrow and pain, but also the possibility of a bond that could change them both. He didn't know how long she would stay or what challenges lay ahead, but he was determined to help her, to ensure that she would heal, and to provide a safe place where she could regain her strength. For the first time in many years, Samuel felt a flicker of hope and purpose. The plains were still wide and lonely, but within the walls of his small cabin there was a spark of connection, fragile but real, and it was enough to light the long shadows of solitude that had filled his life for so long. Outside, the wind continued to whisper through the grass, carrying with it the promise of change. Samuel looked at the girl, her hand resting lightly on the blanket, and silently vowed to be her protector until she could stand on her own again. In that moment, the vast desert did not feel quite so empty, and the rancher who had lived in isolation for decades realized that life had a way of surprising even the most solitary hearts. The days that followed were both quiet and tense in Samuel's small cabin. The Apache girl, whose name he would soon learn was Nayeli, remained mostly silent, her dark eyes observing everything with cautious curiosity. Samuel had tried to speak gently to her each day, but words were only part of the bridge they were trying to build. Even though they spoke different languages, small gestures, patient actions, and simple kindness slowly began to form a fragile connection between them. Nayeli's leg injury was more serious than Samuel had first realized. The wound had begun to swell, and the skin around it was red and tender. Samuel had cleaned it carefully the first night, but without proper medicine, it would take time to heal. He used clean water, cloth, and a simple herbal salve he remembered from his childhood to prevent infection. Each morning he checked the wound gently, making sure not to cause too much pain. Nayeli winced at first, her small body trembling, but she endured it, showing a quiet strength that Samuel could not help but admire. Despite her physical pain, it was clear that Nayeli's suffering ran deeper than the wound on her leg. She often stared out the small window at the endless plains, her expression distant, as if she were remembering something she could not forget. Sometimes she would whisper words in her own language, repeating them over and over, and Samuel could only guess at the meaning. It became evident that she had lost something, or someone, very important. Each time she spoke, a shadow of sorrow crossed her face, and her small hands trembled slightly. Samuel tried to distract her, offering small comforts and routines. He would bring her fresh water, prepare simple meals of bread and milk, and sometimes he would share pieces of fruit from the small garden he kept behind the cabin. He showed her how to feed the chickens and gather eggs, though her movements were slow and careful. Nayeli began to help him in small ways, pointing to tasks she could manage, her trust in Samuel growing little by little. However, their days were not without difficulty. Samuel soon realized that her fever, though mild, came and went unpredictably. Some nights she shivered under the blanket, her teeth chattering despite the warmth of the fire. Samuel would sit beside her, holding her hand and whispering words of comfort. "You are safe here," he said softly. "No one will harm you. I will help you." Even though she didn't fully understand the words, the tone of his voice seemed to reassure her. Slowly, her trembling would ease, and she would drift back into a restless sleep. One morning, as the sun began to climb over the horizon, Samuel noticed that Nayeli had not slept well. Her dark circles were deeper, and her movements were sluggish. She tried to stand, but her leg buckled slightly beneath her, and she cried out in pain. Samuel rushed to support her, careful not to cause further harm. "It's okay," he said gently. "We'll take care of it. You don't have to walk today." Nayeli sank back onto the bed, her small frame quivering. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and she whispered again, "It hurts so much. I can't bear it." Her voice was weak, but it carried the weight of both physical pain and deep emotional exhaustion. Samuel's heart ached at hearing her words. He had faced hardships before, but the raw, unfiltered expression of someone else's suffering struck him in a way he had never expected. Determined to help her, Samuel began to think carefully about what he could do. He had a few old books on natural remedies and medicine, passed down from his grandmother, who had once been a healer in her own small town. He carefully went through the pages, searching for anything that might help Nayeli's condition. He found some suggestions for herbal compresses to reduce swelling and fever, and he gathered what he could from the small garden and surrounding plains. The work was slow and methodical, but Samuel approached it with patience, knowing that Nayeli needed both his skill and his calm presence. The first attempt at the herbal compress was difficult. Nayeli winced as he applied it to her leg. But Samuel spoke softly, explaining each step in gestures and gentle words. Gradually, she allowed him to continue, and the redness began to fade. Each day her leg grew stronger, though the pain remained a constant reminder of what she had endured. Samuel admired her resilience. Even in moments of suffering, she showed courage that went far beyond her years. It was during these quiet, long days that Samuel learned more about Nayeli. Through small gestures and drawings in the dust on the cabin floor, She revealed pieces of her story. She had lived with her family in a village near the mountains, a place full of laughter, music, and community. But one day, during a time of conflict between neighboring groups, she had become separated from them. She had wandered alone, scared and uncertain, until exhaustion and injury brought her to the edge of Samuel's land. Samuel listened carefully, offering comfort when she paused or grew emotional. He could see the fear and sadness that lingered in her eyes, but he also saw glimmers of hope beginning to emerge. Despite the language barrier, a bond was forming between them, a bond built on trust, care, and shared moments of quiet understanding. Samuel realized that healing was not just about tending a wound. It was about easing fear, offering companionship, and showing that someone cared. Outside the cabin, the world continued on its own rhythm. The plains stretched endlessly, dotted with sagebrush and wildflowers, the sky vast and ever-changing. Birds called from the distant hills, and the wind carried the scent of rain yet to come. Life continued, indifferent to human struggle, but within the small cabin time seemed to move differently. Samuel and Nayeli found themselves creating a space separate from the hardships of the outside world, a place where trust could grow and healing could begin. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Samuel had to balance his work on the ranch with caring for Nayeli, often rising before dawn to tend to the cattle and fences before returning to her side. There were moments when he worried, moments when the weight of responsibility felt heavy. But each time he looked at Nayeli's small, determined face, he found renewed strength. He reminded himself that patience and compassion were as important as any remedy or treatment. One evening, after a long day of tending the garden and cleaning the cabin, Samuel brought a small wooden chair next to the bed and sat with Nayeli. He offered her a slice of bread and a cup of water, and for the first time she smiled faintly. It was a small gesture, but it carried immense meaning. Samuel smiled back, feeling a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. In that moment, he realized that the bond between them was growing stronger, and that their time together, though born of hardship, was creating a quiet joy neither had expected. As night fell over the plains, the cabin was bathed in the soft glow of a single oil lamp. Nayeli lay under her blanket, her breathing steady, while Samuel kept a careful watch. He thought about the long journey that had brought her to his doorstep, about the dangers she had faced, and about the courage she had shown. The wind whispered outside, and he felt a sense of connection, not just to Nayeli, but to the world around him. In helping her, he had found a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that even in the most challenging times, compassion and patience could make a difference. By the end of the week, Nayeli's fever had reduced, and her leg was slowly healing. She was still weak, still cautious, but she had begun to trust Samuel in ways she could not yet express in words. They moved together in quiet routines, sharing tasks, gestures, and small moments of laughter. Samuel knew that their journey was far from over, but the first step toward healing, both of body and spirit, had been taken. In those long days of care, patience, and quiet understanding, Samuel and Nayeli began to form a bond that would shape the days to come. The plains outside remained vast and untamed, but within the walls of the small cabin, there was a growing sense of safety, trust, and hope. The journey ahead would be difficult, but they had already taken the first step together, and that step was enough to light the path forward. The following days brought both hope and new challenges to Samuel and Nayeli. While the girl's leg was slowly healing and her fever had begun to subside, Samuel noticed another layer of struggle that he could not treat with herbs or water alone. Nayeli's spirit seemed heavy, weighed down by memories she could not shake. She often sat quietly by the window, gazing out at the endless plains, her small hands folded in her lap, her eyes reflecting a sadness that went deeper than any physical injury. Samuel understood that healing the body was only one part of the journey. Nayeli had endured fear, loss, and loneliness, and those invisible wounds were just as real as the cut on her leg. He tried to comfort her, using gentle gestures and patient words, but there were moments when even his kindness could not reach her. During these times she would shrink into herself, whispering in her own language words that Samuel could not understand. Still, he stayed close, offering his presence as a quiet shield against the loneliness and fear that threatened to overwhelm her. Life on the ranch was demanding, and Samuel had to continue his daily work despite Nayeli's fragile condition. Each morning he would rise before dawn to feed the cattle, check the fences, and tend the small garden that provided some fresh vegetables and herbs. While he worked, he kept a careful eye on the girl, who had begun to move more confidently on her injured leg but still needed support for longer tasks. Samuel found himself juggling the responsibilities of the ranch with the care of Nayeli, and there were moments when exhaustion crept in. Yet every time he saw a faint smile or a small gesture of trust from her, he felt renewed determination. One particularly hot afternoon, Samuel decided to take Nayeli outside for a short walk near the edge of the property. The sun was high, and the wind carried the familiar scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Nayeli moved slowly at first, her hand resting on Samuel's arm for balance, but gradually she began to walk more confidently. The sunlight on her face and the soft rustling of the grass seemed to lift her spirits, if only a little. Samuel encouraged her gently, pointing out small things in the landscape: a lizard sunning itself on a rock, a cluster of wildflowers swaying in the breeze, the distant mountains that marked the edge of the horizon. Despite these small moments of calm, Samuel could see that Nayeli's heart still carried fear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, she suddenly cried out, "It hurts! It hurts so much!" She sank to the floor, clutching her leg, though it was no longer seriously injured. Samuel rushed to her side, kneeling and speaking in the softest voice he could manage. "It's okay, Nayeli. I'm here. I will help you." Her cries were not just about pain. They were the release of a long-held fear and sorrow. Samuel understood that her journey had been far more difficult than he could have imagined. The isolation of the plains, the loss of her family, the uncertainty of survival, all of it had left marks on her young heart. He sat with her, holding her hands, until her trembling began to ease. Slowly her breathing returned to normal, and her tears subsided. That night, Samuel realized that he had to find more than physical remedies. He had to offer stability, comfort, and a sense of hope that could reach beyond the fear. Samuel began to create small routines to help Nayeli feel secure. Each morning they would wake with the sun, and he would help her wash her face with cool water from a basin. They would prepare a simple breakfast together, with Samuel teaching her how to make bread and pour milk into a cup. These small tasks gave Nayeli a sense of purpose and a feeling that she was contributing, rather than only being cared for. Samuel also encouraged her to explore the garden, pointing out plants and explaining which ones could be used for food or medicine. These quiet lessons gave her a sense of accomplishment and helped her regain confidence in her own abilities. Yet, the emotional weight remained. There were nights when Nayeli would sit by the window, staring at the dark horizon, her small frame tense. Samuel knew that the plains, though beautiful, could feel lonely and threatening to someone who had been lost and alone. He began to tell her stories, simple tales of courage, kindness, and the beauty of the land around them. He spoke of the mountains, the rivers, and the animals, weaving a narrative that celebrated life rather than fear. Though Nayeli did not always respond with words, She listened intently, her eyes reflecting the flickering light of the oil lamp and slowly softening with a sense of comfort. One afternoon, Samuel decided to take a risk. He led Nayeli to a small stream that ran not far from the edge of his property. The water was cool and clear, and the sound of it flowing over the stones was soothing. He showed her how to wash her hands and feet, and then gently helped her soak the leg that still ached. Nayeli was hesitant at first, but the soothing sensation of the water seemed to calm her. She stayed by the stream for a long while, letting Samuel help her rinse away the dirt and sweat of the day. In that moment, a fragile sense of joy returned to her expression, a spark that had been hidden beneath fear and pain. Despite these positive moments, the challenges were far from over. Samuel noticed that Nayeli would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, calling out in her native language, her small voice trembling. She seemed to be reliving memories of being lost and alone, and no amount of reassurance could immediately calm her. Samuel would hold her, rocking gently in the dim light of the lamp, whispering soothing words in English, knowing that the tone and care mattered more than the exact meaning. These nights were long and exhausting, but Samuel never wavered. He understood that trust and healing were built slowly, one careful moment at a time. Over time, Samuel began to observe small but meaningful changes. Nayeli started to smile more often, though still shyly. She began to share small details about her life in her village, pointing to objects in the cabin and making small drawings in the dust to explain. Through these gestures, Samuel learned that her family had been kind and close, and that she had loved them deeply. Understanding this helped Samuel realize the depth of her grief and the importance of patience and compassion in helping her heal. The bond between them deepened, though it was often quiet and understated. Samuel found that he cared for Nayeli not only as someone he was helping, but as a companion who had become part of his life. The responsibility he felt was intertwined with affection and a deep respect for her courage. Nayeli, in turn, seemed to sense that Samuel was trustworthy, patient, and dependable. Though her trust was still cautious and hesitant, it was growing steadily, like the first shoots of green pushing through dry soil. Evenings in the cabin became a time of quiet reflection. Samuel would sit by the fire, polishing tools or repairing equipment, while Nayeli watched or helped with small tasks she could manage. They shared these simple moments in silence, each presence comforting the other. Occasionally they would exchange small smiles or gestures that communicated more than words could convey. It was in these quiet routines that Samuel realized healing was happening, not just in her body, but in her spirit as well. Yet, the outside world remained a reminder of the uncertainties that had brought Nayeli to his doorstep. Samuel knew that her journey was far from over, and that eventually she would have to reconnect with her family and her community. But for now, in the safety of the cabin and the steady rhythm of their daily routines, there was a fragile peace, a sense that despite the hardships they had both endured, they were creating a space of trust, care, and hope together. As the week came to an end, Samuel noticed another small but meaningful change. Nayeli began to speak a few English words, carefully imitating him, while he continued to learn bits of her language. They shared small conversations, simple but significant, a bridge forming between two worlds that had once seemed so separate. This growing understanding brought a sense of optimism and strengthened the connection that had begun in silence and fear. Though the challenges were not gone, Samuel felt a quiet satisfaction. He had helped Nayeli through the immediate dangers of her injury and illness, and he had begun to reach the more delicate layers of her heart and spirit. The road ahead would still have difficulties, and there would be moments of fear and pain. But Samuel knew that with patience, kindness, and trust, they could face what was to come together. The plains outside remained wide and empty, the wind carrying the whispers of the desert and the distant calls of birds. Inside the cabin a small light burned, a symbol of hope and care in a world that had been harsh and unforgiving. Samuel and Nayeli, two souls brought together by chance and circumstance, had begun a journey of healing, one that would test their courage, patience, and compassion, but also one that would show them the quiet power of trust and human connection. And so, as night fell and the stars blinked into the vast sky above, Samuel sat by the fire listening to Nayeli's soft breathing and knew that the hardest part was not over, but the most important part, the bond of trust and hope, had already begun to take root. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, the small cabin that Samuel called home began to feel less like a place of survival and more like a space of quiet healing. Nayeli had grown stronger each day, her leg mending her movements, more confident, and her spirit beginning to shine through the shadows of fear and grief. Yet there was still a heaviness in her eyes that Samuel could not ignore, a reminder that the journey toward true recovery was far from complete. Samuel knew that while her body was healing, her heart and mind needed more than food, water, or herbal salves. They needed hope, trust, and a sense that the world could be kind again. He decided to take her on a journey beyond the safety of the cabin, a small adventure that might remind her of the beauty of life and the strength she carried within. Early one morning, Samuel prepared a small pack with bread, fresh water, and a few simple supplies. He led Nayeli to the edge of the property, where the plains stretched endlessly under the wide Arizona sky. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and wildflowers, and the sun was just beginning to warm the horizon with soft golden light. Nayeli's small hand rested in his, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed eager to explore, a spark of curiosity lighting her face. Their destination was a hidden grove near a gentle hill, a place Samuel had discovered years ago. It was filled with wildflowers, a small stream, and the quiet hum of nature undisturbed by human hands. He hoped that the peacefulness of the grove would help Nayeli feel safe and remind her that there was still beauty and goodness in the world. The walk was slow. Nayeli's leg had grown strong, but she still needed support over uneven terrain. Samuel encouraged her with soft words, pointing out birds perched on low branches and rabbits darting through the grass. Nayeli began to smile, pointing at the animals and trying to mimic their sounds. The sound of her laughter, soft and tentative at first, warmed Samuel's heart in a way he could not have imagined. When they reached the grove, Nayeli's eyes widened in wonder. She knelt beside the stream, letting the cool water run over her hands and feet. The sunlight danced across the water, creating patterns that made her giggle. Samuel sat beside her, watching quietly, his heart lightened by the small joys that had returned to her face. For the first time, he sensed that she was beginning to let go of some of the fear and sorrow she had carried for so long. Samuel encouraged her to explore the grove, while he kept a careful eye. Nayeli wandered among the wildflowers, stopping to smell the blossoms, touch the soft petals, and pick small bundles to bring back to the cabin. Each movement, each smile was a victory, a step toward the freedom and happiness she deserved. Samuel felt a deep pride in her courage and resilience. He had seen fear, pain, and uncertainty in her eyes for so long, and now there were moments of pure joy beginning to shine through. As the day went on, Samuel decided to try something he had not dared before. He began to teach Nayeli small survival skills that might one day help her in her village. He showed her how to find clean water, recognize edible plants, and move carefully through the terrain. Nayeli listened intently, her eyes bright with curiosity, asking questions through gestures and the few words she had learned in English. Each lesson was small, but it gave her confidence and a sense of control over the world around her. That evening they returned to the cabin with small bundles of flowers, dirt-streaked clothes, and smiling faces. Samuel tended the fire while Nayeli washed her hands and face in the basin of cool water. She spoke a few more English words that day, forming sentences slowly and carefully, proud of her progress. Samuel felt a warmth spread through him. This was more than just survival. This was transformation. Nayeli was beginning to trust, to hope, to believe in herself again. But the turning point came a few days later, when an unexpected challenge tested both of them in a way Samuel had not anticipated. One afternoon, while Samuel was mending a fence on the far edge of the property, Nayeli wandered a short distance from the cabin, curious about the horizon. She was careful, but the uneven ground caused her to stumble, twisting her foot slightly. She cried out in pain, and Samuel ran to her side immediately. Though the injury was minor, Nayeli's fear overwhelmed her. She fell to the ground, her hands clutching her foot, her eyes wide with panic. "It hurts. I can't move," she cried. Samuel knelt beside her, speaking in calm, gentle tones. "You're safe, Nayeli. I'm here. I won't leave you. We will make it better." He could see that her pain was not only physical, but also a reflection of the long trauma she had endured. The fear of being alone, the worry of injury without help, and the lingering memories of being lost. Samuel carefully helped her to stand, supporting her with steady hands. He encouraged her slowly, step by step, showing her that she could trust him completely. They moved together back to the cabin, each step a lesson in patience, courage, and resilience. Nayeli began to understand that pain could exist without fear, that injuries could heal when met with care, and that trust was a powerful force that could transform fear into safety. That evening, Samuel tended to her foot with a gentle herbal compress and bandages. He encouraged her to rest, but he also spoke about courage, explaining in simple words that even small challenges could be overcome. Nayeli listened, her eyes slowly filling with understanding and a spark of hope. She realized that she was not alone in facing difficulties, and that help could come from unexpected places. Over the next few days, Nayeli's confidence grew even more. She moved freely around the cabin and the yard, helping Samuel with chores and exploring small parts of the land on her own. Her laughter became more frequent, and her eyes held a light that had been absent for months. Samuel could see that the turning point was real. She was beginning to reclaim a sense of strength and joy that trauma had taken from her. Samuel also noticed that their communication had improved. Nayeli was forming more English words, and Samuel had learned more of her language as well. They could share stories in simple phrases, teaching each other about the world they knew. This exchange brought them closer together, creating a bond that was no longer just about care and protection, but also about mutual respect, understanding, and friendship. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Nayeli sat beside Samuel near the fire. She held a small bundle of wildflowers in her hands and smiled. "Thank you, Samuel," she whispered, the words careful but sincere. Samuel felt a deep warmth in his chest. The simple phrase carried immense meaning: gratitude, trust, and recognition of the care that had helped her survive and heal. Samuel knew that the journey was far from over, but he also knew that the turning point had been reached. Nayeli had begun to see herself as strong, capable, and worthy of care and trust. The cabin, once a place of temporary refuge, had become a space of transformation. Through patience, kindness, and unwavering support, Samuel had helped Nayeli move from fear to hope, from isolation to connection. The plains outside remained wide and empty, and life continued with its quiet rhythms. But inside the cabin, a remarkable change had occurred. Two lives, once marked by loneliness and fear, were now intertwined by trust, care, and mutual understanding. Naeli had discovered that she could overcome hardship, that she could trust another human being, and that joy and hope were possible even after immense suffering. As night fell, Samuel watched Naeli sleep peacefully under her blanket. The turning point had not erased all pain or fear, but it had created a foundation of trust, courage, and resilience that would carry them both forward. The journey ahead still held challenges, but for the first time, Samuel and Naeli could face them together, knowing that they were no longer alone in the vast, unpredictable world around them. And so, as the stars appeared above the plains, bright and endless, Samuel felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The turning point had come not in a dramatic moment, but in the small acts of care, patience, and trust that had gradually transformed fear into hope. Naeli had begun to heal in body and spirit, and Samuel had discovered a renewed sense of purpose, connection, and joy in helping her reclaim her strength and her life. The days after Naeli's turning point passed with a quiet sense of hope. The cabin, once a place of fear and pain, had become a home filled with small routines, laughter, and learning. Naeli's leg was almost completely healed now, and her small steps around the cabin and yard were steady and confident. Samuel watched her with a mixture of pride and relief. The girl who had once arrived at his doorstep trembling and hurt was now beginning to reclaim her strength, her spirit, and her joy. But Samuel knew that this was only the beginning of her journey. Naeli's family still awaited her, and while the bond they had built was strong, she needed to reconnect with her people and her community. Samuel also understood that parting would be difficult for both of them. Over the weeks, they had grown attached, each relying on the other in ways that went beyond care for injury or survival. They had shared not only space but hope, trust, and quiet companionship. One morning, Samuel prepared for the journey to take Naeli closer to her village. They packed a small bundle of supplies, water, bread, some herbs for her leg, and a few personal items she had grown fond of. Samuel guided her carefully, supporting her as they walked through the plains. The sun was gentle, the sky a clear blue, and the wind whispered softly through the tall grass. Naeli held his hand, her steps confident but careful, and for the first time she seemed to feel a sense of excitement and anticipation rather than fear. As they traveled, Naeli shared small stories about her family, drawing pictures in the dirt with a stick to show Samuel the faces of her parents, siblings, and friends. She laughed softly as she recreated memories of games she had played and songs she had sung. Samuel listened closely, fascinated by her resilience and the depth of her memory. He realized that while her journey had been painful, her spirit had remained unbroken, and now it shone with a quiet, steadfast strength. Along the way, they encountered other travelers and settlers. Naeli remained cautious at first, but Samuel gently reassured her, teaching her how to trust slowly and safely. She observed, learned, and even tried to speak a few more English words with the strangers they met. The small interactions were victories in themselves, evidence of her growing confidence and ability to navigate a world that had once seemed frightening and overwhelming. One afternoon they reached a small ridge that overlooked the valley where Naeli's village was located. Samuel stopped and gestured for her to look. The village lay nestled between gentle hills, smoke curling from the chimneys, the sounds of life drifting up to meet them. Naeli's eyes widened, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, softly, she whispered, "My family, my home." Samuel smiled gently, letting her words linger in the air. "Yes, Naeli, you are going home," he said. You've grown strong. You can go back to them now." There was pride in his voice, but also a quiet sadness, knowing that the bond they had formed would soon be stretched by distance. Nayeli nodded, her face reflecting a mixture of joy, relief, and the bittersweet realization that change was coming. They descended carefully into the valley. Samuel guided her through familiar trails that he had learned from other travelers. Nayeli's steps were sure, and she held her head high, the fear that had once gripped her heart replaced by courage and determination. The journey that had begun with pain and uncertainty was now filled with possibility, each step forward a testament to her resilience and the bond she had formed with Samuel. When they reached the village, Nayeli paused at the edge, taking in the sights, sounds, and smells. Families moved about their daily tasks. Children laughed and played, and the sense of community was strong. Then, in the distance, a woman appeared, Nayeli's mother. Her eyes widened in recognition, and she ran forward, calling her daughter's name. Nayeli ran to her, and the two embraced, tears of relief and joy streaming down their faces. Samuel watched quietly, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. He had helped Nayeli heal, guided her through fear and pain, and now he was witnessing the reunion he had hoped for. Nayeli turned briefly, her eyes meeting his. She smiled, a small, knowing smile, full of gratitude and affection. Samuel nodded, understanding that this was his moment to step back. His role as protector and guide had reached its natural conclusion. The village welcomed Samuel warmly, grateful for the care and courage he had shown to their daughter. Nayeli's family offered him food and shelter, insisting that he stay as long as he wished. Samuel politely declined, knowing that his place was still on the plains, but he felt a deep connection to the community now, a sense of belonging that he had not experienced in years. Over the next few days, Samuel helped Nayeli settle back into her life. He showed her how to care for small injuries, shared simple ways to keep herself safe while traveling, and reminded her of the lessons she had learned about courage and trust. Nayeli listened intently, absorbing everything with a sense of purpose and maturity beyond her years. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at his cabin. She was now a confident, brave young girl ready to face the world with hope and resilience. Finally, the day came when Samuel prepared to leave. Nayeli's family walked with him to the edge of the village, offering heartfelt thanks and gifts for his kindness. Nayeli hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Samuel. You saved me." Samuel felt a lump in his throat, but smiled warmly. "You saved yourself, Nayeli," he said. "I just helped you see it." As he turned to leave, Samuel looked back one last time. Nayeli stood at the edge of the village, her head held high, her smile bright, and her spirit strong. The bond they had shared would remain in their hearts forever, a memory of courage, care, and trust that could never be broken. He mounted his horse and rode back across the plains, the wind in his hair and the vast sky above him. He felt a sense of peace he had not known in years, a quiet fulfillment in knowing that he had made a difference in a young girl's life. Back on his ranch, Samuel continued his daily routines, but the experience with Nayeli had changed him. The isolation he had once cherished now felt less important than the connections he had made. He often thought of Nayeli and her family, imagining them together, happy and safe. The memory of her laughter, her courage, and her gratitude remained with him, a reminder that even in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable, kindness, patience, and trust could make a profound difference. As the seasons changed, Samuel would sometimes ride to the edge of his property and look toward Nayeli's village. He knew that life would go on for both of them, each carrying the lessons and memories of their time together. The plains remained vast and quiet, but Samuel no longer felt alone. He had discovered that life's greatest rewards often come not from solitude, but from the quiet bonds we form when we care deeply for another being. In the end, Nayeli's journey had taught them both valuable lessons. She had learned that even in the face of fear, pain, and loss, courage and resilience could carry her forward. She had learned that trust and kindness could transform despair into hope. Samuel had learned that compassion, patience, and empathy could heal not only the wounds of the body, but also the wounds of the heart. Together, they had shared a journey that neither would ever forget, a journey that began with pain but ended with hope, courage, and a bond that transcended distance and circumstance. As the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in golden and pink hues, Samuel sat on his porch, reflecting on the journey he had shared with Nayeli. Though she was now safely back with her family, a part of her, her courage, her joy, and the bond they had formed remained with him. And in his heart, Samuel knew that the story of the lonely rancher and the brave Apache girl would live on, a quiet testament to the power of trust, compassion, and the human spirit. The plains stretched endlessly before him, but for the first time in many years, they no longer felt empty. They were filled with the memory of a small girl who had arrived in pain and fear, and who had grown into strength and hope. Samuel knew that, just as he had helped her find her way, the world still held the potential for kindness, healing, and the unexpected bonds that could change lives forever. And so, life continued, quiet, steady, and full of possibility. Samuel tended his ranch, caring for the land and animals, but the memory of Nayeli and the lessons they had shared remained a light in his heart. In that light, he found not just peace, but a profound understanding of the truth that had guided their journey all along. Even in the hardest times, compassion and courage could create a path toward hope, healing, and a brighter future.